This season just finished here in the US, so if you live in the UK and you're wondering why I'm making this review over 2 months later, well, it's just because I live across the pond. Downton Abbey Season 5. Now, if you've heard of Downton Abbey and you haven't watched it, but you're interested in watching it, I would recommend you stop watching this review right now and go back and see if you can watch Seasons 1 through 4. It is a great show if you're into British nobility as characters as well as their servants. If this upstairs, downstairs type narrative is your thing, I'd recommend you go watch it. It's a really good show. But if you haven't seen it at all, stop watching because things I'm going to say are probably going to get into spoiler territory. Potential spoilers in 3, 2, 1. So the synopsis for this season might be a little long, considering that there's a lot of characters in this show already, so let's just see how many we can go through one by one. So in this season, you start to see Robert becoming a little bit distant from his wife, Cora. There's no real given explanation for why this happens. It just kind of happens and Cora starts noticing, but she doesn't make a big thing of it. But unfortunately, this leaves room for an art collector who visits Downton, Mr. Bricker, to try to make some moves on the Countess of Grantham. Meanwhile, the world of the Dowager Countess of Grantham, Violet, and her friend Mrs. Crawley, some royal Russian refugees, come to England because something big was going on in Russia during that time, and one of them happens to be an old flame of Violet's. Now, this old flame is waiting for the princess to be found and brought to safety, but in the meantime, reuniting with Violet, his feelings resurface, and he proposes, some would say, an improper affair with Violet. Does Violet pursue him, or should she stay back and wait for the princess to come because that's how it has to be? As for Isabel Crawley, when Lord Merton proposed to her, Violet starts getting worried that, even though she approves of Lord Merton as a man, she starts getting worried that Isabel's going to be moving away from her since they just formed this close friendship bond to where they're going out to lunch together, having wonderful conversations that only the writing of Julian Fellowes could actually make really interesting and entertaining. And Violet is worried that that is going to end with Mrs. Crawley marrying Lord Merton. Now for the younger generation of Crawleys. Mary's looking to get married again, and she thinks Lord Gillingham might be the one. Meanwhile, with Lady Rose, she meets a young Jewish banker named Atticus Cinderberry, and the two seem to be getting pretty close. I wonder where that's gonna go. Tom in this season meets a school teacher who seems to share Tom's socialist beliefs. However, the Crawleys don't seem to approve of her, and it might actually be for good reason other than her political beliefs. Meanwhile, Tom is also thinking of moving away from Downton, though he is grateful for his in-laws of taking him in and making him a part of the family after Sybil died. He wants to move away and start a new life for him and Sibby. He doesn't know if it would be Ireland or if it would be America. He's not sure, but it's on the mind this season. Edith might have the most interesting subplot out of all the noble characters on this show. So remember last season when she had the affair with Michael Gregson? Well, it wasn't really an affair. It was a legitimate relationship between the two characters. And Michael Gregson went off to Germany, and he never came back. But that left Edith with Michael's baby. She eventually has the baby and gives it to a local farming family, the Drews. The patriarch of the family, Mr. Drew, is the only one who actually knows the full truth, while his wife doesn't know everything yet. And Lady Edith would make routine visits to visit Marigold. That's the name of the kid, Marigold. That's cute. And furthermore, Edith starts getting more and more and more attached to the kid, which starts to create tensions between her and the Drews. We are so far into this, and we haven't really gone through half of it, because we still gotta talk about the staff. So remember that teacher that Mr. Branson met? Well, that teacher decides to give Daisy some schooling lessons, as Daisy's starting to become interested in an education. Eventually, the teacher leaves, and Mr. Molesley, you know, that one manservant that no one seemed to like on this show, well, Mr. Molesley decides to change that for himself and kindly give Daisy some school. Also, he's starting to have feelings for Mrs. Baxter, who just joined the staff last season. Thomas, Barrow, is trying to make Mrs. Baxter the next Mrs. O'Brien. Baxter's not all for it, but Thomas seems to have a hold on her, given that he knows a secret about Baxter's past that would be devastating to her career if revealed to Lord and Lady Grantham. Tom goes through a period of drug abuse this season because, well, he kind of wants to get rid of the gay thing that's inside him. He wants to cure it, so he finds some sort of drug that he has to inject to himself that he thinks will do the job, but all it does is just make him really, really sick and makes the rest of the servants worry that he might not be able to do his job properly. As for Mr. Carson, well, the citizens of Downton want Mr. Carson to be in charge in arranging a memorial to be built for all those who've fallen locally in World War I. This puts Mr. Carson in a big position of responsibility, bigger than ever before, which is something that Lord Grantham is not sure about because he finds it puzzling that they didn't ask him, but pretty soon he comes to work with it. In fact, he attempts to help Carson whenever he can. Mr. Carson is also developing feelings for Mrs. Hughes, and the first indicator of that is when the Crawleys propose to build a new village and to expand the village with very nice houses. Mr. Carson proposes to Mrs. Hughes that they rent a house together and collect the rent for the tenants. In a sense, they would be living together. How cute. But the big elephant in the room that I will not skip over, that I've saved for last, is with the Bates. So in last season, Lord Gillingham's servant, Mr. Green, brutally raped Anna. Mr. Bates eventually finds out about this, and of course, he is not happy at all, to the point where they're smart enough to not tell him who the rapist was, otherwise they know Mr. Bates is gonna go out and kill that son of a bitch. Which wouldn't look good for Bates, because that means he'd go back to jail, and he'd probably hang this time. And you know how in the end of Season 4, when it was revealed that Mr. Green fell into the roadway and got run over by a car and died? Almost like he got pushed. And that was in York. And you know who else was there? Mr. Bates. So did he do it? Not even Anna knows yet. But we'll find out in this season, especially as officers from Scotland Yard come by to Downton to investigate, putting everybody in Downton in a bit of pressure. Now, am I missing anything? Oh yeah, Isis. Isn't Isis getting a bit old? And that completes my very disjointed, broken up synopsis of Downton Abbey based on their characters. So what did I think of this season? Let me get my one gripe out of the way. Lady Mary. I don't know if the writers hated the character and wanted to make her look bad, but the way her subplot goes makes me really dislike the character and not care about her. I just want someone to slap her in the face. And it doesn't help that her insults to Edith, I mean, they've always been there, although I feel like now they're becoming more prevalent and ruder than ever. It's just like, oh God, woman, shut up! I don't like you anymore! But other than that, I still enjoy the show. But the whole theme about times are changing, even though the show has always been about this, but it seems a lot more prevalent this time as characters are getting older, characters are going through new stages in their lives, some may be moving away. It seems like the show is coming to an end soon. I would say Downton Abbey has maybe 1 or 2 good years left in it before it starts dragging, really dragging. So, I hope that the writers, based on interviews that I read, I know that the writers are thinking of an end game, they just don't know where it's ending, considering that they haven't confirmed where it was going to end. They haven't announced that Even though they announced that season 6 is, they're making a season 6, they haven't announced if season 6 is going to be the end, or if they're going to have a season 7 and that's going to be the end. They don't know. Or if they do know, they haven't announced it yet. I just recently read an interview in which Maggie Smith, the lovely Maggie Smith, who plays Violet, Dowager Countess of Grantham, she expressed concern that the series was winding down. In fact, she said she's probably not gonna make it through season 6. Her character, that is. She feels that her character is pretty old and should pass away pretty soon. And as really sad as that to think, because it's really hard to imagine this show without her, I would have to agree to her. I would think there's gotta be a moment where Granny will eventually pass on. Very sad to think about. In fact, I think the only reason they kept her alive this long is because they managed to write some really good lines for her, and Maggie Smith delivers them without a hitch. So all in all, I enjoyed this season of Downton Abbey. I had a blast with it. Looking forward to it when it comes to America next January on PBS. I hope that the writers are thinking about an endgame for this show, and in thinking about it, I hope when they do execute a finale, I hope the show sticks the landing. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.